So what is the best survival knife? What survival knife do I recommend? Hey, I need a survival knife for my kid, for my bug out bag. What should I buy? Guys, I'll be answering all of those questions and more. Remember that if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, consider doing so, especially if you do like the content. That is more than appreciated. Click the subscription button somewhere there below. You also have the channel with a ton of information, as well as my books, Surviving the Economic Collapse for the economic survival aspect of preparedness, as well as Street Survival Skills, where I talk about a ton of this stuff: practical skills, gear, weapons, tools, self-defense, EDC, and a ton more stuff, practical skills, preparing food, storing, and a bunch more important information available in Amazon, following those links there below. So guys, let's get to this last video of this series. We talked about small survival knives, we talked about medium survival knives, and finally we'll be talking about large survival knives. Each one of these have their specific roles, and if you need a small survival knife, well, this is all great, but hey, it is just too big. I can't have this in my pack. I don't want to have this in my kids. It just doesn't work for me. But on the other hand, hey, yes, I live in a cold weather region. I may need to start a fire so as to stay alive, because if not, I will freeze to death. And if the only thing I have is my tiny little mortar knife, well, it's going to be a lot better than nothing, but a larger knife that allows me to process, cut, chop down wood, that's going to be something super nice to have. It would be better if I have an axe, maybe, sure, but that's the advantage of the large survival knife. Now, what are the advantages of a large survival knife? What I just said. It's going to be chopping better. It's going to be cutting hard materials like wood better. It has more force. It has more weight to it. You have more reach depending on what you need that knife for. But basically, I'm of the philosophy that bigger is always better. Maybe not always, but in general, bigger is better. It is also true that there's things you can do with a large knife and kind of get around its size so as to work as if it's a smaller knife. This is a facon knife. A facon knife is a typical knife of the Argentine gaucho. The gaucho would be like an American cowboy, but instead of having a gun, he had a knife. And the gaucho was more of a loner, more of a guy that lived out in the wild, more of a frontiersman kind of personality than your cowboy, right? These are guys that like to be left alone, working in the fields, and him and his horse and his knife. His best friend was his horse and his knife. He didn't even bother with a gun, because the knife, in his view, was more reliable, did not need ammunition, which was harder to come by and more expensive, and the fragile mechanic of a revolver, well, he trusted the knife. And the knife he trusted the most was his facon knife, which is this. This is a typical classic facon knife, which is basically like a large dagger, short sword kind of knife. And he used this thing for everything. Of course, for fighting, that would be one of the main things any decent gaucho would know how to use his facon for, but also for killing animals. And I just mentioned killing animals. It's not all that different from this hunting knife made by Muela, a modern iteration of what is not so different from a facon knife. So this was great for ending an animal, for finishing game, killing an animal that was wounded or whatnot, for hunting. These were the things that they did, but if he had to maybe cut food, he would just grab it like so and use the tip for more detailed cutting. It was fairly common for them to not even bothering sharpening this part right here, because it would often grab it from this part. So little things that people that live with knives all day long and use these things all day long would tend to do. The handle was a narrow tang going through, and it was just hammered into place, and all of this was filled with tar, which would be heated, and once it was soft, it was placed through it. And when they broke the knife, which they did every once in a while, and if this was made of fine, a craftsmanship and silver, which any gaucho that had a little bit more money would probably go for, it was just a matter of heating this up, removing the blade, replacing the blade with a new one, waiting until it cools down, hammering this so as to keep it from slipping, and that was his knife. He was ready to go just as well. All of these things apply to modern knives. So if it comes down to using it for hunting, this is gonna be a better knife for fighting and for dueling and for fighting someone else with a knife. Both of these are gonna be better for hunting as a knife to kill a wild boar or any large dangerous creature. And that is in itself an advantage of the bigger knife. This is a decent tactical knife, but if you want to fight, yeah, you are better served with a bigger knife. If it's about chopping wood, it would be fantastic if you have an axe, but if you don't have an axe, a bigger knife will do. Something like this thing, like a cleaver sort of big ass knife, right? These are things in which the bigger knife just does better. If it's just about dealing with cutting soft, thin vegetation, proper machete is extremely useful. It's one of the most versatile tools you can have. So a machete, yeah, all day long. A machete is a fantastic option as a survival tool. It is a little bit thin, and if you have to baton, even a much smaller Glock knife will do. My Aitor knife, being pretty thick, will baton and separate wood better, wedge through it better than this narrow, thin blade. But when it comes to hacking and slashing, using it as a tool for self-defense, using it as a tool for digging, and a number of things, given how wide it is, how cheap these things are. You can have a bunch of these machetes in different kits, and it's not gonna break the bank. These are $15-20 worth of knife, right? And that is also a consideration to keep in mind. But the big knife usually does things that the smaller one simply cannot. Now, you have knives like the kukri, right? A tool, utilitarian field tool, but also used as a weapon by the famous Gurkha warrior. These are great options. These are pretty big, these are pretty heavy, so you have to keep that in mind. Maybe a medium-sized knife, or even a small knife and a hatchet. That would not be a horrible combination. If I live in a wooded area and I just want to have a little mora for actual cutting and a small hatchet from Fiskars or whatever, yeah, that would make maybe that makes even more sense than just having a big old knife. Now, again, I've always been of the idea that I want to have a big knife. If I have the option, bigger is better. And maybe for me, this geometry is kind of like the ideal large survival knife. This is from Bussy, the Bushwhacker Mistress. Essie has the Junglas, which is very similar. Basically, it's like a big knife with a somewhat thick blade. It's not as thin as a machete, but it has no need to be excessively thick. Some of the Bussy knives are just way too thick, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for any practical application. This is a very nice large survival knife. It's gonna be chopping, it's gonna be cutting wood, it's gonna be giving me that reach advantage if you're using this for self-defense. It has the mass and the momentum to slash and do a heck of a lot of damage. If you have someone at a distance, there's no doubt which one you want to have. And hell, maybe even the machete is better because it's faster in hand, has more reach. The dueling characteristics of a hunting knife like this, maybe even better for those quick jabs. I don't know. But this is definitely more of an utilitarian thing. If I'm also throwing in there prying, if I'm throwing in there digging and smashing and hammering, this is pretty much as good as it gets in terms of a big survival knife. You have options. You have this one as well. There's even a larger version of this one, which is a pretty cool knife on its own. These are very nice. But yeah, that was always what I wanted in my own knife, and this being more of a medium, almost reaching that large. For me, a large knife, a large survival knife is going to be over 7 inches, over 8 inches long, right? It's going to be 9-10 inch long. That's going to be a large survival knife for me. But because I had to make it a little bit smaller so as to hit that medium size that is definitely more popular for survival applications, I just compacted it and went with more metal so as to have that better chopping ability in spite of not having the longer reach, right? So that the compromise is always there. But there's another very interesting knife that I always try to keep in mind: the rifleman knife for that rifle company from the American military back in the day. So they had these knives made. It reminds me a lot of, well, it's not all that different, right? From, well, it's maybe, yeah, it's definitely bigger, but it's hitting that spot of, we want to have a short sword, utilitarian large blade, so as to clean the terrain, cut down wood, prepare the ground for camp, that sort of thing. This is what a large survival knife kind of should be. And the modern version of this, the way I see it, is very close to this, right? I would be very happy with this same blade, full tang knife, right? And removing some of this weight and metal and shiny brass stuff. This would be a very nice large survival knife, the way I see it, adapted right to these more modern times with a touch here and there. But yeah, guys, that's basically it. I think that we covered most of these things. There's room for everything, and depending on your needs, it may be a small knife, a medium one that kind of hits those 2 points there without being too big and too small. Or maybe your need is, yeah, I just want to have a large survival knife because I live in a wooded area, there's snow, and if I don't prepare wood, I freeze to death, and this or that other reason. These are all valid options, and that's what we have here. There's of course a lot more, but I think these cover more of the more tactical or fighting application or hunting application, and the more utilitarian one, which as always going to be more of a broader blade, and some are going to be more choppy leaning, and some are going to be more machete thin, fast blade leaning, and it's up to you to decide what works best in your situation. Guys, that's going to be all for now. See you in the next video. Take care.